Hello viewers. Welcome to Seek Wisdom. Today in this video, we present you the summary of the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, written by Manson. In this generation-defining self-help guide, a superstar blogger cuts through the crap to show us how to stop trying to be a positive all the time so that we can truly become better, happier people. We have tried to capture the whole essence of the book, so the duration of the video is a bit larger. Do watch till the end. Let's get started. Our culture today is obsessively focused on unrealistically positive expectations. Be happier. Be healthier. Be the best, better than the rest. But when you stop and really think about it, this advice is actually fixating on what you lack. You learn about the best ways to make money because you feel you don't have enough money already. Ironically, this fixation on the positive only serves to remind us over and over again of what we are not, of what we lack. Everyone wants you to believe that the key to a good life is a nicer job or a more rugged car, but actually giving too much attention to these is good for their business. And is bad for your mental health. The key to a good life is not to run after more, rather, it's about less, paying attention only to what is true and immediate and important. Take a situation, you get anxious about confronting somebody in your life. That anxiety cripples you and you start wondering why you're so anxious. Now you're becoming anxious about being anxious. Now you're anxious about your anxiety, which is causing more anxiety. Similar happens with anger, worry. This is called feedback loop from hell, which has become a borderline epidemic, making many of us overly stressed. The problem here is, social media has bred a whole generation of people that having negative experiences such as anxiety, fear, guilt is totally not okay. That's why, not giving too much concern is the key. Stress-related health issues, anxiety disorders, and cases of depression have skyrocketed over the past 30 years. Our crisis is no longer materialistic, it's existential, it's spiritual. We have so much stuff and so many opportunities that we don't even know about to what should we give concern. Actually, the desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience. And, paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experience is a positive experience. It's what the philosopher Alan Watts used to refer to as the backwards law, the idea that the more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become. Everything worthwhile in life is won through surmounting the associated negative experience. Any attempt to escape the negative, to avoid it, only backfires. Pain is an inextricable thread in the fabric of life, and to tear it out is not only impossible, but destructive. To not give a concern is to stare down life's most terrifying and difficult challenges and still take action. Look, this is how it works. You're going to die one day. And in the short amount of time between here and there, you have a limited amount of things you can concern about. Very few, in fact. And if you go around giving concern about everything and everyone without conscious thought or choice, then you're going to be miserable. When we believe that it's not okay for things to suck sometimes, then we unconsciously start blaming ourselves. We start to feel as though something is inherently wrong with us, which drives us to all sorts of overcompensation. The idea of not giving concern is a simple way of reorienting our expectations for life and choosing what is important and what is not. There is a premise that underlies a lot of our assumptions and beliefs. The premise is that happiness is algorithmic, that it can be worked for and earned and achieved. This premise is the problem. Happiness is not a solvable equation. Dissatisfaction and unease are inherent parts of human nature. We suffer for the simple reason that suffering is biologically useful. It is nature's preferred agent for inspiring change. We are wired to become dissatisfied with whatever we have and satisfied by only what we do not have. This constant dissatisfaction has kept our species fighting and striving, building and conquering. So our own pain and misery aren't a bug of human evolution, they're a feature. Pain is a product of our nervous system, a feedback mechanism to give us a sense of our own physical proportions. It helps show us what's good for us versus what's bad for us. It helps us understand and adhere to our own limitations. Problems never stop, they merely get exchanged or upgraded. Happiness comes from solving problems. The key word here is solving. If you're avoiding your problems or feel like you don't have any problems, then you're going to make yourself miserable. To be happy, we need something to solve. Happiness is therefore a form of action. Happiness is a constant work in progress, because solving problems is a constant work in progress. True happiness occurs only when you find the problems you enjoy having and enjoy solving. People make problems complicated in two ways: denial of problem and having victim mentality, believing and blaming others. Forms of blame and denial are a way to temporarily escape our problems that makes us feel better. We all have our chosen methods to numb the pain of our problems, and in moderate doses there is nothing wrong with this. But the longer we avoid, the more painful it will be when we finally do confront our issues. Next is our emotions. Emotions are the biological signals designed to nudge you in the direction of beneficial change. Like pain of touching a hot stove teaches you not to touch it again. But keep in mind, emotions are part of the equation of our lives, but not the entire equation. Just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good. Just because something feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. Emotions are merely suggestions that our neurobiology gives us, not commandments. Therefore, we shouldn't always trust our own emotions. In fact, we should make a habit of questioning them. Many people are taught to repress their emotions for various personal, social, or cultural reasons. Sadly, to deny one's negative emotions is to deny many of the feedback mechanisms that help a person solve problems. As a result, many of these repressed individuals struggle to deal with problems throughout their lives. And if they can't solve problems, then they can't be happy. An obsession and overinvestment in emotion fails us for the simple reason that emotions never last. Whatever makes us happy today will no longer make us happy tomorrow. Everybody enjoys what feels good. Everyone wants to live a carefree, happy, and easy life. A more interesting question is, what pain do you want in your life? What are you willing to struggle for? For example, most people want to get the corner office and make a boatload of money, but not many people want to suffer through 60-hour work weeks. Obnoxious paperwork. Because happiness requires struggle. It grows from problems. Real, serious, lifelong fulfillment and meaning have to be earned through the choosing and managing of our struggles. What determines your success isn't, what do you want to enjoy? The relevant question is, what pain do you want to sustain? In 1970s, self-esteem practices began to be taught to parents, emphasized by therapists, teachers, and instituted into educational policy. But the problem with those is following those will make you entitled. And entitlement is a failed strategy. It's not happiness. Adversity and failure are actually useful and even necessary for developing strong-minded and successful adults. The problem with the self-esteem movement is that it measured self-esteem by how positively people felt about themselves. But a true and accurate measurement of one's self-worth is how people feel about the negative aspects of themselves. When something traumatic happens in our lives, we begin to unconsciously feel as though we have problems that we're incapable of ever solving. And this assumed inability to solve our problems causes us to feel miserable and helpless. But it also causes something else to happen. If we have problems that are unsolvable, our unconscious figures that we're either uniquely special or uniquely defective in some way. That we're somehow unlike everyone else and that the rules must be different for us. Putting simply, we become entitled. The deeper the pain, the more helpless we feel against our problems, and the more entitlement we adopt to compensate for those problems. The truth is that there's no such thing as a personal problem. If you've got a problem, chances are millions of other people have had it in the past, have it now, and are going to have it in the future. It doesn't mean you aren't legitimately a victim in some circumstances. It just means that you're not special. Most of us are pretty average at most things we do. Even if you're exceptional at one thing, chances are you're average or below average at most other things. That's just the nature of life. But it's the extremes that get all of the publicity. Our lives today are filled with information from the extremes of the bell curve of human experience, because in the media business that's what gets eyeballs. This flood of extreme information has conditioned us to believe that exceptionalism is the new normal. And because we're all quite average most of the time, the deluge of exceptional information drives us to feel insecure and desperate. Our culture today believes that we are all destined to do something truly extraordinary. The fact is, this statement is inherently contradictory. After all, if everyone were extraordinary, then by definition no one would be extraordinary. The rare people who do become truly exceptional at something do so not because they believe they're exceptional, but because they're obsessed with improvement. And that obsession with improvement stems from an unerring belief that they are not that great at all. It's anti-entitlement. Self-awareness is like an onion. There are multiple layers to it. The first layer of the self-awareness onion is a simple understanding of one's emotions. The second layer of the self-awareness onion is an ability to ask why we feel certain emotions. This layer of questioning helps us understand the root cause of the emotions that overwhelm us. Once we understand that root cause, we can ideally do something to change it. The third level is our personal values. Why do I consider this to be success or failure? This level is incredibly difficult to reach. But it's the most important because our values determine the nature of our problems, and the nature of our problems determines the quality of our lives. Honest self-questioning is difficult. There are a handful of common values that create really poor problems for people, problems that can hardly be solved. 1. Pleasure. Pleasure is great, but it's a horrible value to prioritize your life around. Research shows that people who focus their energy on superficial pleasures end up more anxious, more emotionally unstable, and more depressed. And yet, pleasure is what's marketed to us 24/7. Pleasure is not the cause of happiness, rather, it is the effect. 2. Material success. Research shows that once one is able to provide for basic physical needs, food, shelter, and so on, the correlation between happiness and worldly success quickly approaches zero. The other issue with overvaluing material success is the danger of prioritizing it over other values, such as honesty, non-violence, and compassion. 3. Always being right. The fact is, people who base their self-worth on being right about everything prevent themselves from learning from their mistakes. For staying positive, constant positivity is a form of avoidance, not a valid solution to life's problems. Denying negative emotions leads to experiencing deeper and more prolonged negative emotions and to emotional dysfunction. The trick with negative emotions is to express them in a socially acceptable and healthy manner and in a way that aligns with your values. The point is to nail down some good values and metrics, and pleasure and success will naturally emerge as a result. Good values are reality-based, socially constructive, and immediate and controllable. While bad values are superstitious, socially destructive, and not immediate or controllable. If you're miserable in your current situation, chances are it's because you feel like some part of it is outside your control, a problem that was somehow thrust upon you without your choosing. There is a simple realization from which all personal improvement and growth emerges. It is that we, individually, are responsible for everything in our lives, no matter the external circumstances. We don't always control what happens to us. But we always control how we interpret what happens to us, as well as how we respond. Whether we like it or not, we are always taking an active role in what's occurring to and within us. The more we choose to accept responsibility in our lives, the more power we will exercise over our lives. Accepting responsibility for our problems is thus the first step to solving them. Don't think that if you are responsible, then you are at fault also. Responsibility and fault often appear together in our culture. But they're not the same thing. There are also problems that we aren't at fault for, yet we are still responsible for them. There's a difference between blaming someone else for your situation and that person's actually being responsible for your situation. Nobody else is ever responsible for your situation or your happiness but you. This is because you always get to choose how you see things, how you react to things, how you value things. But what about really awful events? Like if you get robbed, you're obviously not at fault for being robbed. Do you panic? Do you freeze up? Do you tell the police? These are all choices and reactions you're responsible for making or rejecting. You didn't choose the robbery, but it's still your responsibility to manage the emotional and psychological fallout of the experience. In life, luck is always involved, but luck doesn't dictate the long-term results. It's the choices you are making throughout the life. Now say you accept that you have bad values, you are entitled and think that the world revolves around you. Question comes: how to change? The answer is, there is no how. In every moment of the day, you are choosing the things that you are concerned for. So change is as simple as choosing something else to be concerned for. We have to accept that we are always wrong, and that is how life improves. Growth is an endlessly iterative process. When we learn something new, we don't go from wrong to right. Rather, we go from wrong to slightly less wrong. We are always in the process of approaching truth and perfection without actually ever reaching truth or perfection. Certainty is the enemy of growth. Nothing is for certain until it has already happened. That's why accepting the inevitable imperfections of our values is necessary for any growth to take place. Instead of striving for certainty, we should be in constant search of doubt. Doubt about our own beliefs, about our own feelings, about what the future may hold for us unless we get out there and create it for ourselves. Instead of looking to be right all the time, we should be looking for how we're wrong all the time. Because we are. There are two problems with us in this regard. First, the brain is imperfect. We mistake things we see and hear, misinterpret events quite easily. Second, once we create meaning for ourselves, our brains are designed to hold on to that meaning and we are biased towards that. So, we should be careful about what we are believing. Trust yourself less. After all, if our hearts and minds are so unreliable, maybe we should be questioning our own intentions and motivations more. The more you embrace being uncertain and not knowing, the more comfortable you will feel in knowing what you don't know. It is the root of all progress and all growth. Questioning ourselves and doubting our own thoughts and beliefs is one of the hardest skills to develop. But it can be done. Here are some questions that will help you develop uncertainty. 1. What if I'm wrong? The simple act of asking ourselves such questions generates the humility and compassion needed to resolve a lot of our issues. 2. What would it mean if I were wrong? Often the answer to such a question is pretty straightforward. But probing questions are necessary in order to get at the core problems that motivate your behavior. 3. Would being wrong create a better or a worse problem than my current problem, for both myself and others? The goal here is to look at which problem is better. Because after all, life's problems are endless. Next comes failure. Failure is the way forward. Improvement at anything is based on thousands of tiny failures, and the magnitude of your success is based on how many times you've failed at something. If you think about a young child trying to learn to walk, that child will fall down and hurt itself hundreds of times. But at no point does that child ever stop. Avoiding failure is something we learn at some later point in life. A lot of it comes from our education system, which judges rigorously based on performance and punishes those who don't do well. Then comes overbearing and critical parents, the mass media. We can be truly successful only at something we're willing to fail at. Similarly, pain is part of the process. It's important to feel it. Learn to sustain the pain you've chosen. When you choose a new value, you are choosing to introduce a new form of pain into your life. Relish it. Savor it. Welcome it with open arms. Then act despite it. If you're stuck on a problem, don't sit there and think about it, just start working on it. Even if you don't know what you're doing, the simple act of working on it will eventually cause the right ideas to show up in your head. Your actions create further emotional reactions and inspirations and move on to motivate your future actions. If you lack the motivation to make an important change in your life, do something, anything, and then harness the reaction to that action as a way to begin motivating yourself. As an extension of our positivity consumer culture, we are told that we should try to be as inherently accepting and affirmative as possible. Same thing is mentioned in many of the so-called positive thinking books. But we need to reject something. Otherwise, we stand for nothing. Avoiding rejection gives us short-term pleasure by making us rudderless and directionless in the long term. The act of choosing a value for yourself requires rejecting alternative values. The desire to avoid rejection at all costs, to avoid confrontation and conflict, is a deep and subtle form of entitlement. Rejection is an important and crucial life skill. It makes our relationships better and our emotional lives healthier. Understand the significance of boundaries in a relationship. By boundaries mean the delineation between two people's responsibilities for their own problems. People in a healthy relationship with strong boundaries will take responsibility for their own values and problems and not take responsibility for their partner's values and problems. People in a toxic relationship with poor or no boundaries will regularly avoid responsibility for their own problems and take responsibility for their partner's problems. For a relationship to be healthy, both people must be willing and able to both say no and hear no. Without that negation, without that occasional rejection, boundaries break down and one person's problems and values come to dominate the others. Conflict is not only normal, it's absolutely necessary for the maintenance of a healthy relationship. Without conflict, there can be no trust. Conflict exists to show us who is there for us unconditionally and who is just there for the benefits. Consumer culture is very good at making us want more, more, more. But more is not always better. In fact, the opposite is true. We are actually often happier with less. When we're overloaded with opportunities and options, we suffer from the paradox of choice. Saying no to irrelevant things will make you committed. Commitment gives you freedom because you're no longer distracted by the unimportant and frivolous. Next comes death. As mentioned in the book, Denial of Death, we essentially have two selves. The first self is the physical self, the one that eats, sleeps. The second self is our conceptual self, our identity, or how we see ourselves. We are all aware on some level that our physical self will eventually die, that this death is inevitable, and its inevitability develops fear. In order to compensate for this fear, we try to construct a conceptual self that will live forever. This is why people try so hard to put their names on buildings, on statues, on spines of books. Author called such efforts our immortality projects. Religion, politics, war, sports, art, and technological innovation are the result of people's immortality projects. Death is inevitable. Therefore, we should not avoid it, but rather come to terms with it as best we can. Because once we become comfortable with the fact of our own death, we can then choose our values more freely. The Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome implored people to keep death in mind at all times, in order to appreciate life more and remain humble in the face of its adversities. In various forms of Buddhism, the practice of meditation is often taught as a means of preparing oneself for death while still remaining alive. Confronting the reality of our own mortality is important because it obliterates all the crappy, fragile, superficial values in life. Here we shall wind up the video. We hope you like it. We'll see you soon with another video. Till then, be happy.